say thank you to them for the great job that they're doing. But the best way that we can say thank you and to support the industry, as we've supported Beef Week here, is to be doing the things on policy that supports their success. It's been great to see here at Beef Week how this sector is taking such strong steps forward, whether it comes to technology, whether it comes to how they manage their pastures, how they're contributing to the broader emissions reduction task, how they're contributing to jobs, how they're contributing to the success of our exports. But that performance of the livestock industry, just like with the grains industry, depends very much on what we do as a federal government, as a Commonwealth government, to protect the biosecurity of this country. Border security has many elements to it. And you've heard me speak about border security on many occasions over a long period of time. But a key aspect of border security, how we keep our borders secure, is to protect our livestock industry and how we protect our grains industry across Australia. $66 billion industry. All depends on how well we keep the border secure from pests and from disease. There's some 2.5 million containers that come through this country last year, 19,000 commercial vessels, 60 million mail items that come through, some 35,000 pest and disease detections put in place by our border agencies and our quarantine. That's a fantastic job, but the risks continue to be out there and they're ever present. And that's why today we're announcing $371 million in additional investment in Australia's Ring of Steel on our border security for our agriculture industry. I'm going to ask Minister Littleproud to take you through the details of that. But these are very practical measures. They come on top of the significant investments that we put in last year's budget in this same area. And that backs in also the significant freight assistance that we've been putting in the industry, over $600 million, to ensure that products continue to get to market from our world-class producers. That $371 million covers things like new 3D X-rays and screening. As David says, boots on the ground and paws on the ground when it comes to detection dogs and others which are keeping secure our agricultural industries. It is also involving a partnership between the states and territories and the Commonwealth, because should there ever be a breach, how we deal with any outbreak within the country is also incredibly important as to further rings of containment. We've seen how important that is in COVID. It's the same when it comes to African swine flu or lumpy skin disease or any of these types of things, which can be absolutely devastating to our agricultural sector and particularly our beef and cattle producers that we see on display here. So we're very serious when it comes to border security, on all the elements of border security, and I want to commend David Littleproud for the great job he's done in leading the government's efforts when it comes to border security and keeping our borders strong for our farmers, for our producers. I also want to thank Michelle Landry for the great leadership she has had for the cattle industry here in central Queensland, but for the resources sector more broadly, and it's great to be here with you, Michelle. David, you're doing a terrific job up here in Queensland, and it's great to be with you as well. And to Scotty Buchholz, he's as big as this show, and it's tremendous to be here with him. He's a great advocate for the beef industry here in Queensland. And one of the things Scotty did with the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, which David won't mind me saying, I'm sure, is as we went into the pandemic, they kept the trucks running across Australia. Between those borders when they were getting shut down, it was Scotty, it was the Big Mac, as I like to call him, Michael McCormack, who was out there keeping those trucks running, keeping the stock running from state to state. And that kept Australia running, and the people who did that more than anyone else were our primary producers. So with that, I'll pass you on to David.
Well, thanks PM, and can I say the investment that we're announcing today is another investment in Australia's security. This takes our investment in Australia's biosecurity since October last year to $1.25 billion. That's how serious the Australian government is about protecting brand Australia, protecting those beef producers that are here today, making sure that we are using the cutting-edge technology we need to make sure that we are keeping those pests and diseases out. And there is a congestion of them sitting in Southeast Asia that are threatening and evolving, and we have to evolve our efforts with them. And that's why the package that we're putting out today will go to evolve our biosecurity measures to make sure that they're fit for purpose and fit for the future. It's also about working with the states, and part of the money is about making sure that we can run a national exercise whereby we can simulate a outbreak of foot and mouth disease or AFS across the country and make sure that our state counterparts are able to work with us to ensure that we can lock it down as quickly as we can. It's also about the more boots and more paws in the ground. We've increased the number of dogs in our quarantine centres right across our ports and airports, and we're also making sure we're putting more men and women out there detecting, making the detections. But also the scientists. It's important you understand that we are able to do the science quickly to identify the threat. And that means that we're then able to make real-time decisions about how we're going to address that threat. But we're also now engaging for the first time in real technology that's going to give us increased capacity of being able to look at more parcels, more bags, more containers, 3D X-rays, where we have now the first nation in the world to crack the algorithms that will now be able to look at every port that comes through an airport, every parcel that comes through our mail centres. We'll be able to actually identify whether there's organic matter, and in fact we're going to take it to be able to identify whether there's any live animals in it as well. We'll be then working with Border Force to make sure that we can use this technology to share, so that we'll take the biosecurity risk, they'll take the risk to our nation with guns and contraband. So these are the practical solutions about getting value for money to the Australian taxpayer, using the technology we need to continue to invest. And we're also working on our screening program and working with other nations so that if someone wants to come into this country, we will know what's in their bag before they even get here, and we will then act accordingly. Our biosecurity is predicated on intelligence and technology. We need the intelligence to understand what's coming into this country, and that's making sure that we can understand what's coming in parcels, but also people's bags. And we'll also be going back and looking at the containers. We'll be going to over 8.5 million containers that need to be checked. A percentage of those will have to be checked over the coming decade. And so we need to know where they've been beforehand. So we're not just looking at the trip they've just made, we're going deep back into their history and their life to make sure that if they happen to be in a paddock in Africa some 4 or 5 years ago, then we know that that poses a risk to Australia. And then we will obviously put the resources in to make sure that we can protect that. But what we're also saying is that to everybody, you all have a responsibility. And if you don't declare, we're going to square up with you. And in fact, we've already cancelled 14 visas of people who have failed to declare products in their bags, and they are not welcome back to this country for 3 years. We have also increased the penalties from $444 to $2,664, and we now have legislation in Parliament for importers who also have a significant responsibility in this, in taking their fines from $400,000 odd to over $1 million, and the privilege to stay at Her Majesty's pleasure for up to 10 years. We are taking this seriously, and we need to understand the threats that biosecurity pose to not just agriculture but our environment. A foot and mouth disease would cost us around $52 billion, and beef, this event, would basically be non-existent for years to come. So these are the extreme measures that we're prepared to take, and we're going to send a very strong message, not just with our dollars, but also our actions, in making sure everyone understands that they have a responsibility, and if they don't declare, we're going to catch you and we're going to come after you.
Happy to take some questions. I also thank Bryce Camp for the wonderful job he's done here for Beef Week. This is really a showcase, an event, and everyone at Meat and Livestock, and also it was great to see Fiona Simpson here as well from the NFF coming up from New South Wales. It's great to see the industry coming together. It really is tremendous to see. Okay, happy to take questions. Let's start on the announcement, and we'll go from there.
Prime Minister, in regards to agriculture, what reassurance can you give to cattle farmers that the budget will incorporate drought funding? I mean, here in Central Queensland, we haven't had much rain all summer. Yeah, well, I'll ask David to add to this, but we have consistently been supporting our farmers through the drought over many, many years now, and just because we've seen rain in many parts of the country, which is welcome. We know that there are still parts of the country that are still impacted by drought, including here in Queensland. The flood and drought assistance program, which Shane Stone leads, has been there working with people on the ground all throughout the drought, and particularly in the response to those floods we had up here in Queensland. And those supports will continue, and we will continue to stand by our farmers, whether it's with drought, whether it's with flood, or whether the many other disasters that befall them, and of course to protect them from the biosecurity risk as well. But David, as the Minister for Drought, I'm sure would like to add.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Prime Minister. And the drought is ongoing. In fact, your very next drought starts the very first day after it stops raining. And that's why the government created our 3-pillar drought strategy, supporting in the here and now through farm household allowance, making sure that we can put some dignity back into these families that are doing it tough, that don't have income, so they can put bread and butter on the table. Making sure we also, in our second pillar, support the communities that are supporting these farmers, because the drought extends past the farm gate into the communities that are supporting them. We're putting stimulus into those communities and those small businesses to give them the opportunity to get through. And we were the first government to look to the future, in understanding that your next drought starts the very first after it stops running. The $5 billion future fund, we're already paying down the $100 million dividend. That has been legislated. The other mob said, trust us, we'll just keep it there. But what normally happens when the other mob gets in is they get a treasurer that runs out of money pretty quick, and all of a sudden they think it's easy to take it out of the agriculture industry and out of the drought fund, a $100 million dividend, and reduce it. So that we've legislated, it's there, that $100 million must be spent every year, and Brent Finlay is doing that. So these are the measures that we are saying that will be ongoing, because we understand drought is part of the landscape of Australia since we first put a till in the soil. We won't take our foot off the accelerator on that, but we're also working to look at our packages. Over 24 programs that we put out, we're making sure that they are fit for purpose, and I've asked the NFF and all the peak bodies, agricultural bodies around the country, to come together and look at that nearly $11 billion envelope that has been committed by this government to be looked at, and to see whether it's actually working the way that they expect, and to make sure that it's fit for the future. Those are the practical steps that we're making. Drought will be there for time immemorial, and we will be there with them. This government will stand shoulder to shoulder with our farmers, whether it be drought, fire or flood, or anything else in between.
Minister, what kind of longer-term solutions are being looked into in terms of water security? We've seen liquid weir here in central Queensland, but what's on the horizon that the government can offer to the people of central Queensland?
$3.5 billion that was announced in the budget, that's all about water infrastructure. We are ready to dig holes and plumb the country. It is illegal for the Prime Minister and I to pick a shovel up and dig a hole in this country. The Constitution clearly says the ownership of our resources belongs to the states, and we respect that. We're not running away from our responsibility. We're going to cut the cheque. We're going to say, if you want to come and do it, we'll cut the cheque. And in fact, of the last 20 dams built since 2003, 16 of those have been done in Tasmania. They have plumbed their state because they have been bold and courageous, and they have partnered with the Commonwealth to make sure that we are plumbing that state. The opportunity is there for others. New South Wales is looking to build some dams. We are working up here with Rookwood, but there's an enormous potential in Northern Australia if the Queensland Government would come with us. When you think about agriculture reaching $100 billion, it will be in the north of our country. That is where the development can take place. Our southern systems are mature. There are only incremental growth that we can get in our production systems in the southern parts of Australia, but our northern Australia is where the opportunity lies, and that's why we've made the commitment of cold, hard cash. We just need someone to come and get it. It's not hard, and we just want to see D8s and excavators digging them up now, because people are sick of the talk. They just want to see some diesel burn.
Where would you like to see the next dam built in Queensland?
Well, I'm the member for Maranoa. I'd love them to start it at Emu Swamp. I'd love them to start at Emu Swamp. We've already committed $47 million, but we can't get the state government to give the tick of approval to get the excavator moving. The cockies down there put in $23 million of their own money, and the state government, God bless them, only put 13. That's okay, but just give us the approval, get out of our way, and start digging.
Prime Minister, can I just ask about India?
Mine's Hewenden. I want to see the Hewenden irrigation scheme go ahead. I'm passionate about this project. I think that's going to really open up that part of the country and provide some great opportunities. So there's no sort of places we want to dig some holes here. But as David Crisafulli knows, we need a state government that's going to work with us to do just that. Now, you know, we're working with the Queensland government. You know, we're working on many other projects. We'd like to see a bit coming back the other way to ensure we get to these dams built.
Prime Minister, just on India, Michael Slater.
Are we finished with ag?
I guess with agriculture as well today, what have you learned from walking around Beef Week? You've gone around to a lot of different stalls, met a lot of different people. What have you heard from the people here?
Well, I've been inspired. That's my first message. I've been inspired by the resilience and the resourcefulness of people, and just listening to their stories about what they've been doing over these last few years in between beef weeks, and the struggles they've had, but some of the success they're now having. I think one of the things that really does excite me, though, is the amount of attention that is now going into the technology side of this business, and a realisation of the data analytics and the various tools that are available to the livestock industry, working with quite extreme environmental challenges, and really harnessing the use of technology to get on top of that, and then using the data to make their farming methods even more productive. That's what will keep them at the leading edge of the world, and I think that's tremendous. And how that relates to pasture improvement, soil carbon, and speaking to NMLA about that today, and the level of interest that there is from the livestock industry wanting to understand how that works and what's driving it: business, commerciality, improved pastures, better profits, stronger herds. That's what's driving that interest in these areas, and I'm just pleased to see it because it shows innovation, it shows passion, it shows vision.
They'll make net zero emissions as the industry is planning to.
I'm confident that this sector and the Australian industry more broadly will achieve anything it puts its mind to, and they're certainly putting their mind to this.
Prime Minister.
Last night,
It was pretty good. I was beef cheek last night. The steak this morning, it wasn't bad. it was a bit early for a steak for me, but I tell you what, if it was like that every morning, I wouldn't complain.
Local cuisine.
Yeah, it was very, very. I got a few good tips too on the cooking, so I'll take that back with me. Yeah.
Just on India, Prime Minister, is it possible that you might overturn the biosecurity measures by the end of the week?
As I've said all the way through from the outset, we will constantly review these. It's in place till the 15th of May. That's what the biosecurity order signed by the Health Minister is, and we need that time. That's our advice to ensure that we can prepare for the repatriation flights that we hope to start soon after the 15th of May, but we'll take the health advice on that. We are already seeing in Howard Springs the number of confirmed cases starting to come off. That's what we want to see over the next couple of weeks. In the last flights that we saw come in, we had 1 in 8 of those who arrived had COVID. See, the challenge we're facing here is not just the rampant spread of the pandemic in India, but it has been the accelerated rate of where we've seen infection of people coming from India. Now, we didn't see that same high rate of infection in those flights coming at earlier times. And so that is what has sparked the concern from our health advisors and from the government. And so that's why we've taken this temporary pause to ensure not only have we prevented those direct flights from coming for the time being, and there are only direct flights going into Sydney, but also the chartered flights for those next 2 weeks, and preventing people coming through third countries. Because if we hadn't done that, then we were at risk of having to shut off the flights from Doha and from the Emirates and from other places, even potentially out of Japan. And that would have prevented other Australians coming home. So it was a practical decision made on health grounds. It's temporary. It's until the 15th of May. We will review that over the course of this week. We'll review it again over the course of next week, as we do with all of our decisions. The biosecurity law enforcements that have been put in place have been there for 14 months. The same rules apply to prevent people from going into remote Indigenous communities. They would have faced exactly the same fines and potential arrangements for those sanctions as is being applied here. But the extremes of those sanctions haven't been applied in those circumstances. It's there to support a policy decision of the government to stop a third wave in Australia. We can't be complacent in this country. As I said this morning, just because we can put 100,000 people in the G to watch a game of footy on Anzac weekend does not mean that this pandemic is in any way, shape over. The pandemic is raging, and so my government will take the steps necessary and the actions necessary to protect Australians so we can also bring more Australians home safely.
Michael Slater says you've got blood on your hands because of this ban. Is he right, and what do you say to those Australians in India now fearing for their health and their lives?
Well, no, I don't agree with him, and I would just, again, thank all of those who are in this difficult situation for their patience and their understanding. I'm working to bring them home safely. The great risk of not taking the actions the government has taken was that we could see the rate of cases that we're seeing come in only increase further and jeopardise our medium to long-term abilities to bring more Australians home. So this is a decision that has been taken both in the interests of keeping Australians safe now, but also to put us in a stronger position to safely bring more Australians home. So I respectfully disagree with the critics on this one, but the buck stops here when it comes to these decisions, and I'm going to take decisions that I believe are going to protect Australia from a third wave and help me to be able to reach out and bring more Australians safely home from places where they're in difficult situations.
Prime Minister, have you had a chance to consider Victoria's proposal that's been sent to the Commonwealth for the permanent quarantine facility?
It's being assessed now. It's being assessed by our agencies now. I welcome the proposal. It's in contrast to some others we've received, it's a very detailed and comprehensive proposal. I welcome the fact that the Victorian government understands that in any facilities, when it comes to enforcing their public health orders, which is the quarantine order, that they would be running the operations and providing the support for those facilities to operate. There are question marks as to the investment that the Commonwealth would be required to put in place, but we'll look at that in good faith. I welcome the fact that the acting Premier has raised it with us, and we'll deal with that as a government, but we've all got responsibilities here. The Commonwealth, I should stress though, the Halton Review recommended that we establish a national resilience facility for quarantine, and we have. It's called Howard Springs. It will have a capacity this month of 2,000 people. It is coming at a cost to the federal taxpayer of $500 million. So I won't have it said that the Commonwealth is not doing its fair share of the heavy lifting when it comes to putting those facilities in place. We have done that. That's where we will be bringing those Australians home from India. And that goes from 850 last month to 2,000 this month. States are doing their job. They've got a 99.99% success rate in preventing breaches in their hotel quarantine. Howard Springs has 100%. I'm hoping we can keep that.
So just on the investment.
Yeah.
Are you, Kat, I know ruling in, ruling out, are you open to considering the Commonwealth making some contribution to this?
Well, I'm not getting ahead of myself, basically, James. I mean, they've submitted a proposal. I'm treating that proposal with the respect that it should have, because it has been it is a very comprehensive and detailed proposal. So a lot of effort's gone into it, and we'll look at it seriously. Any of the fiscal issues, I'm sure we would raise and discuss those first with the state government. But I'm not getting ahead, and nothing should be read into that. We'll just take it on its merits, and we'll consider it as part of our broader policy position.
Just on biosecurity, why have a law if you're not
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Sorry, just on the biosecurity, why have a law if you're not going to impose penalties?
Well, the sanctions are there. They exist, but they'll be exercised proportionately and responsibly. Those sanctions have been in place now for 14 months, and we haven't seen the extremes of those sanctions being required. And I think it would be remote, a very remote circumstance that would see them imposed in these circumstances, but they're imposed seriously because we need to prevent people coming who have been in India during the last 14 days, because the risk of infection that they're bringing is very high. That's the medical advice. So I don't want to see them necessarily imposed anywhere, because I don't want to see people breaching the rule. And if everybody cooperates, then we can get things in a stronger position, and that means we can start those repatriation flights again. I think it hasn't been helpful for these things to be exaggerated. These powers have been around for 14 months, and they've been used responsibly and proportionately and effectively, and that's what we're doing now. It's my responsibility to do everything I can to prevent a third wave in this country. And so I make no apologies for that, and I thank particularly the Indian community here in Australia and overseas for their patience and their understanding. They are going through terrible hardship at present, and we understand that. That's why we are working quickly to get ourselves in a position to safely bring more of their families, the citizens, the residents, their direct family members back safely. We have already brought 20,000 people who are registered in our High Commission and consulates across India back to Australia through facilitated flights and repatriation flights. So we have been doing the heavy lifting there. I want to get in a position where we will continue that shortly, but we won't be doing it in a way that will risk a third wave and put Australians' health at risk. Thanks, everyone.
And just on Maurice Payne's opinion piece this morning.